On April 20th, 1945, Berlin was no longer a capital city. It was a sinking ship, and every Soviet artillery shell struck it like a hammer against rusted steel. Deep underground, beneath the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler summoned Wilhelm Mohnke and gave him one final order: defend to the last man. He accepted it calmly, not because of sudden fanaticism, but because, for him, there was no other way to exist. By then, Berlin was already a ghost city. Communications were collapsing, command structures existed mostly on paper, and defeat was no longer a question of if, only when. Still, Mohnke stayed. In the days following Hitler's suicide, Mohnke was still inside the government quarter, gathering shattered SS units, giving orders that could no longer change the outcome, and planning a desperate breakout through streets already controlled by Soviet troops, giving orders that could no longer change the outcome, and planning a desperate breakout through streets already controlled by Soviet troops. The escape failed. On May 2nd, Mohnke was captured. He did not fulfill his mission through victory, but by remaining until nothing was left. He defended Hitler's collapsing center of power to the very end, because in his world, retreat no longer had meaning, because in his world, retreat no longer had meaning. Why would a man go that far? The answer lies not in Berlin's final days, but in 14 years of continuous loyalty within the SS system, from 1931 to 1945. That time was enough to turn the son of a working-class cabinet maker who struggled with periods of unemployment in post-war Germany into one of Hitler's trusted officers. Mohnke's loyalty was not an abstract ideology. It was his personal identity, slowly shaped by promotion, recognition, and survival inside a violent system that rewarded total commitment. The SS gave him purpose, status, and belonging, and leaving Hitler would have meant erasing who he believed he was, along with every sacrifice he had already made. Then comes the hardest question of all. How did a man accused of war crimes at Wormhout in 1940 and Fontenay-le-Paynel in 1944 live quietly until 2001? The answer reveals the limits of post-war justice. 6 years in Soviet captivity produced no charges. West Germany's Cold War priorities pushed prosecutions aside. Evidence weakened, witnesses died, and Mohnke simply outlived accountability. His life followed 3 clear transformations: from worker to elite soldier, from combat officer shadowed by accusations, and finally to a suburban businessman who never expressed remorse. Each phase led naturally to the next, not through reflection or repentance, but through adaptation. He did not reinvent himself. He narrowed his world, focusing on private life while the public record slowly faded. That journey began in the chaos of Weimar Germany, where insecurity, anger, and the promise of order made radical loyalty feel not extreme, but necessary. In the Baltic port city of Lübeck, where Wilhelm Mohnke was born in 1911, his father worked as a cabinet maker, building modest furniture for modest wages. The family lived carefully, counting coins and repairing what could be repaired rather than buying new. The Great War's end in 1918 brought not peace, but chaos, and the hyperinflation of the early 1920s destroyed whatever savings the family had managed to accumulate. Money became almost meaningless, wages were paid and spent the same day, and stability vanished from daily life. Young Wilhelm grew up hearing how Germany had been betrayed, how the Treaty of Versailles had humiliated the nation, how politicians had failed the people who had sacrificed everything. These stories were repeated in homes, workshops, and beer halls, and they formed a simple explanation for hardship that a child could understand. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, 6 million Germans lost their jobs, and even those still employed lived with constant fear of dismissal. Mohnke, with limited education and no connections, faced a future of unemployment and insignificance, a life defined by waiting rather than advancing. Opportunities closed faster than they appeared, and social mobility seemed like a broken promise. The Weimar Republic's politicians seemed incapable of solving the crisis, and their arguments sounded distant and weak to people struggling to survive. In this environment, extremist parties gained support as desperate people searched for solutions that were clear, forceful, and emotional rather than cautious and complex. In 1931, when he was 20 years old, Mohnke joined the Nazi Party and soon afterward entered the SS, a decision that gave him structure and certainty at a time of deep social and economic crisis, a decision that offered certainty where none had existed. The appeal was straightforward. The Nazis promised to restore German greatness, and the SS offered belonging to those the Republic had left behind. For someone from Mohnke's background, acceptance into this elite organization represented validation that he was worthy, capable, chosen, and no longer invisible. Although some SS officers later came from traditional middle-class or military families, Mohnke's background as the son of a working-class craftsman was typical of many early SS members who saw the organization as a path to status and belonging, with nothing to fall back on except the organization itself. This difference would shape the intensity of his commitment, because leaving the SS would mean losing not only status, but identity and purpose as well. By 1933, when the Nazis seized power, Mohnke had shown discipline and reliability during his early years of service, qualities that were valued by the SS as it expanded its role within the new regime, showing reliability, physical endurance, and obedience under pressure. His reward came with assignment to guard duty at Nazi Party headquarters in Munich, where his 6-foot frame and unwavering discipline caught the attention of senior leaders. Daily routines of drills, inspections, and ceremonies reinforced hierarchy and loyalty, turning ideology into habit. Later that year came the selection that defined his life. Joining the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal bodyguard unit, which stood at the center of power and symbolism in the new regime. The Leibstandarte had strict requirements, height standards, proof of pure Aryan ancestry, political reliability confirmed through years of service. Being selected meant Mohnke had passed every test, both physical and ideological. More importantly, members swore an oath not to Germany or the military, but to Adolf Hitler personally, replacing abstract duty with personal devotion. I swear to you, Adolf Hitler, as Führer and Reich Chancellery, loyalty and bravery. The oath began. I pledge to you, and to those you have named to command me, obedience unto death. For Mohnke, serving within Hitler's personal guard unit and taking part in rallies and security duties brought him close to the symbols of power, even if his contact with the Führer remained distant and formal. Attending rallies, being part of the protective detail, this personal connection to the Führer, even as a distant guard, which may have strengthened his sense of personal loyalty beyond ordinary professional duty, as daily rituals and symbols reinforced emotional attachment to the regime, reinforced daily by ritual and proximity. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Mohnke had spent 6 years in this role, years that shaped his worldview, loyalty, and sense of self. The uniform, the oath, and the belief in destiny had merged into one. The test of that loyalty was about to begin, not in ceremony or ideology, but in war, where obedience would carry real and irreversible consequences. On September 1, 1939, as German forces crashed across the Polish border, Mohnke experienced combat for the first time with the Leibstandarte regiment. The campaign's speed and brutality set patterns that would follow. Polish forces were overwhelmed within weeks, and Germany divided the country with the Soviet Union. Mohnke distinguished himself in the fighting. He earned the Iron Cross Second Class during the Polish campaign, and he continued to rise inside the Leibstandarte, reaching the rank of Hauptsturmführer in the period that followed. But the Leibstandarte operated behind advancing front lines where Nazi racial policies were already being implemented with shocking brutality. While Mohnke's specific role in these operations remains undocumented, the Leibstandarte operated in occupied Poland at a time when Nazi racial policies were being enforced with extreme brutality. So even if Mohnke's personal actions remain unclear, he served inside a system where mass violence was already becoming routine. Whether these experiences raised doubts or deepened commitment, we cannot know, but the record shows he stayed, advanced, and never questioned his path. In May 1940, when Germany invaded France, Leibstandarte spearheaded the assault, and Mohnke led his company through the rapid advance that stunned the world. Then came the event that would shadow his reputation forever. On May 28, 1940, near the village of Wormhout in northern France during fierce fighting, on May 28, 1940, near Wormhout, about 80 British and French prisoners, many from units tied to the 48th South Midland Division, were taken to a small barn at La Plaine-aux-Bois, where grenades and then gunfire were used to kill them. According to British post-war investigations based on survivor testimony, grenades were thrown into the crowded space, followed by machine gun fire. Some men survived by hiding under bodies, and these witnesses later provided detailed accounts of what they had seen. British post-war investigations, built mainly on consistent survivor testimony, treated the killings as a deliberate massacre rather than a random act of battlefield violence. The question investigators could never definitively answer was who gave the order. Was it Mohnke himself, officers below him acting independently, or soldiers who had lost control in battle's heat? Mohnke consistently denied ordering prisoner executions. "I issued no orders not to take English prisoners or to execute prisoners," he stated after the war. He maintained that in combat's chaos, with communications broken and units scattered, he could not be held responsible for every action by men under his nominal command. Prosecutors never established proof beyond reasonable doubt that he had given specific orders or had known about the killings and failed to prevent them. Whether Mohnke directly ordered these killings or they occurred outside his knowledge, the allegations raised questions about command responsibility. The Leibstandarte cultivated a culture of ruthlessness, and senior commanders bore some level of responsibility for their unit's actions, even without direct involvement. This would not be the last time his name appeared alongside prisoner-killing accusations. On April 6, 1941, during the opening day of the Balkans campaign, Mohnke was badly wounded in a Yugoslav air attack, and part of his foot later had to be removed. Shrapnel tore through his right leg, and surgeons had to remove part of his foot. The injury left him with a permanent limp and chronic pain managed with medication, including morphine. From March 1942 to May 1943, he served in a training role commanding the Leibstandarte's replacement battalion, preparing recruits for combat far from the front lines. The injury and recovery period could have provided time for reflection on the war's direction, but if doubts arose, they left no trace. In September 1943, Mohnke eagerly returned to frontline duty as commander of the 26th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment in the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Jugend. This unit was composed largely of young volunteers who had grown up under Nazi indoctrination and whose commitment to the cause was absolute. During the Normandy campaign in June 1944, units under Mohnke's command faced new accusations during the Normandy campaign in June 1944. Units tied to Mohnke's regiment faced new accusations when about 35 to 36 Canadian prisoners were killed near Fontenay-le-Penel. The pattern, captured soldiers killed shortly after surrender during intense combat, resembled Wormhout. Again, direct evidence linking Mohnke to specific orders was lacking, but the repetition across different years and enemy forces suggested something beyond isolated incidents. On January 30th, 1945, despite the allegations and Germany's worsening military situation, Hitler promoted Mohnke to SS Brigade Führer, and the promotion showed how loyalty and battlefield performance often outweighed ethical concerns in the Nazi system. The promotion revealed Nazi military culture's priorities. Battlefield results mattered more than ethical concerns, and loyalty to Hitler trumped everything else. Mohnke had been wounded in service, fought with distinction, and never questioned orders. In Hitler's view, these qualities made him worthy regardless of what he might have done or failed to prevent. Within weeks, that loyalty would face its ultimate test in the Ardennes forest. By December 1944, Germany faced catastrophe. American and British forces had reached the Reich's western borders, while Soviet armies massed for the final drive toward Berlin. Adolf Hitler, gambling on one last chance to split the Allies and force negotiated peace, ordered a massive counteroffensive through Belgium's Ardennes forest, Operation Wacht am Rhein. The plan was bold: strike through thinly defended American positions, capture bridges over the Meuse River, drive to Antwerp's port, split American and British armies, and create such chaos that the Western Allies might negotiate separate peace. Then Germany could turn all remaining strength against the Soviets. The SS division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler would lead the northern assault, and Mohnke understood this operation represented Germany's last chance to avoid total defeat. Hitler himself had emphasized the stakes. "Everything is at stake," he reportedly told commanders. "If we do not succeed, we have lost the war." But the plan contained a fatal flaw. The Leibstandarte began with barely enough fuel for 100 miles of advance, meaning success depended on capturing Allied fuel depots intact, a gamble placing the operation's fate beyond German control. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 a.m., German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front. 2 hours later, Mohnke's forces surged forward through morning mist, catching American units by surprise. Initially, everything worked. American defenders fell back in confusion, German tanks pushed through gaps, and Antwerp seemed almost possible. Within hours, the plan unraveled. The Ardennes' narrow, winding roads created massive traffic jams. German tanks, trucks, and assault guns backed up for miles, while commanders screamed into radios trying to coordinate hopelessly snarled movements. American resistance stiffened at every crossroad as reinforcements rushed to threatened sectors. The fuel crisis escalated immediately. On December 17th, Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe captured the Büllingen fuel dump, briefly alleviating the shortage. But most other Allied depots were destroyed before Germans could reach them, forcing agonizing choices about which units got priority. A German officer who survived later recalled, "We were racing against our own fuel gauges, knowing that every kilometer forward meant one less kilometer we could retreat if things went wrong. When clouds cleared after several days, Allied fighter bombers appeared overhead in devastating numbers, turning traffic-jammed German columns into burning wreckage. American artillery found the stalled formations and pounded them mercilessly. The Leibstandarte fell behind schedule within 2 days. Then came the Malmedy massacre. On December 17th, near the Belgian town, soldiers from Peiper's Kampfgruppe machine-gunned 84 American prisoners in a snow-covered field. When word spread through American units, the effect was electric. Soldiers who might have surrendered when surrounded now fought to the death. As news of the Malmedy massacre spread, many American soldiers became more determined to resist, and later accounts suggest that fears of capture reduced willingness to surrender. "We fight or we die right here." Allied commanders, alarmed by the atrocity, diverted additional resources to halt the German advance, giving moral urgency to stopping the offensive. By December 22nd, the German advance had slowed sharply, and although some units were still fighting forward, it was becoming clear that the offensive was losing momentum. Elements of the Leibstandarte, especially Joachim Peiper's battle group, became bogged down near Stavelot and La Glaise, where reinforced American positions proved impossible to break. The 101st Airborne's stand at Bastogne prevented Germans from controlling vital road networks. Patton's Third Army pivoted northward with remarkable speed and hammered the German southern flank. With fuel reserves exhausted and Allied air power pounding trapped columns, Hitler's gamble had failed. Although senior commanders urged retreat by Christmas 1944, Hitler refused at the time, and only in early January 1945 did he finally allow German forces to pull back from the Ardennes. The Leibstandarte limped eastward, leaving behind hundreds of destroyed tanks, thousands of dead soldiers, and Germany's last strategic reserve. The offensive had consumed irreplaceable resources Germany could never replace. On January 30th, 1945, as Germany's situation continued to collapse, Mohnke was promoted to SS Brigade Führer, a decision that reflected Hitler's emphasis on loyalty rather than battlefield success. This advancement amid disaster showed that loyalty mattered more than results. Mohnke had remained devoted as everything collapsed, and in Hitler's mind, that devotion deserved reward. Within 3 months, that devotion would be tested in Berlin's ruins. On April 20th, 1945, as Soviet artillery systematically destroyed Berlin, Adolf Hitler summoned Mohnke to the Reich Chancellery bunker. Hitler, celebrating his 56th birthday amid his capital's ruins, ordered Mohnke to command the Citadel sector encompassing the Reich Chancellery and the Führer bunker. He ordered Mohnke to hold the government district at all costs and to make no retreat. Berlin's defense structure was chaotic. General Helmuth Weidling commanded the city's overall defense, but Mohnke operated outside his authority, reporting directly to Hitler and focusing solely on the government district. This created immediate SS Wehrmacht tensions, with regular army officers resenting the special status given Hitler's bodyguard. But for Mohnke, the chain of command was clear. "My orders came from the Führer himself," he later told interrogators, "not from the army generals." Kampfgruppe Mohnke was a desperate collection of approximately 2,000 men. Elite SS unit remnants, including Leibstandarte survivors from the Ardennes, flak crews from anti-aircraft batteries, replacement troops who had never seen combat, Clarks-given rifles, along with various rear area personnel, and very young auxiliary fighters drawn from the collapsing defenses of the city. This ragtag force represented the final defense of the 1,000-year Reich, collapsing after 12 years. From April 20th onward, Soviet artillery relentlessly pounded the government district, methodically reducing buildings to rubble and turning streets into moonscapes of overlapping craters. Mohnke's men constructed defensive positions from debris, shattered concrete, twisted steel beams, furniture dragged from ruined buildings. They understood that every hour held meant one more hour of life for Hitler, but their entire identities had been built on service to the Führer. What else could they do? In the bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, the atmosphere as the walls trembled from artillery impacts and smoke's acrid smell seeped through ventilation shafts, likely felt suffocating. Mohnke, moving between defensive positions above ground and Hitler's command center below, witnessed the disintegration of the regime he had served for 14 years. Hitler's health visibly deteriorated. His hands showed visible tremors, his walk had become unsteady, and his health was clearly failing. His gait shuffled, his mood swung wildly between rage and resignation. Loyalty questions consumed everyone. Who would stay until the end? Who would flee? Heinrich Himmler had attempted to negotiate separate peace with the Western Allies, a betrayal that sent Hitler into violent rage. Hermann Göring had suggested taking over leadership, which Hitler interpreted as a coup attempt. The inner circle fractured, but SS officers like Mohnke held firm to their oaths. Just blocks away, Soviet forces stormed the Reichstag. The battle for that gutted parliamentary structure became symbolic. Red Army soldiers fought room to room, floor to floor, determined to raise their flag over the building that had once housed German democracy. Mohnke knew that once the Reichstag fell, the bunker would be next. His daily reality was brutal. Moving constantly between front lines and bunker, his permanent limp from 1941 caused pain that worsened with stress and exhaustion. He faced shortages of everything: ammunition, food, medical supplies. Deserters increased daily as men realized the war was lost. Units disintegrated under relentless bombardment. But he kept trying, because giving up would mean admitting everything he believed was a lie. On April 28th, as the Soviet noose tightened around the city, Hitler ordered Mohnke to convene a military tribunal. The accused was SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, Himmler's liaison to Hitler and Eva Braun's brother-in-law, charged with deserting his bunker post, a crime that seemed absurd when the Reich itself was deserting its people. The tribunal was held in cramped quarters beneath tons of reinforced concrete. General Hans Krebs, General Wilhelm Burgdorf, and Johann Rattenhuber attended. Fegelein, caught attempting to flee Berlin in civilian clothes, appeared before them. According to witnesses, he seemed drunk and defiant. When Mohnke questioned him about abandoning duty, Fegelein reportedly mocked the proceedings. "What difference does it make?" he was said to have asked. "We'll all be dead in days anyway." Mohnke, recognizing the tribunal had become meaningless, ended the proceedings and handed Fegelein to Rattenhuber's security squad. What happened to Fegelein remains disputed. Some accounts claim execution in the Reich Chancellery garden. Others suggest he was shot while trying to escape. But the tribunal illustrated how completely discipline had collapsed. Even family connections to Eva Braun could not save a man from execution, demonstrating that loyalty to Hitler remained the only currency that mattered. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet forces fought to within a few hundred meters of the Reich Chancellery, Mohnke was summoned to the bunker where Hitler was preparing for the end. The man Mohnke had served for 14 years was about to take his own life rather than face Soviet capture. Mohnke was not in the room when Hitler took his own life sometime between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That final moment was witnessed only by a handful of Hitler's closest staff. But Mohnke was summoned immediately after. General Krebs called a conference and announced the Führer was dead and they would attempt to break out of Soviet encirclement. The war was over. According to those present, Mohnke received the news without visible emotion. He immediately began organizing escape groups, dividing remaining men into small units with better chances of slipping through Soviet lines than a large formation would have. For Mohnke, Hitler's death likely created a strange freedom. For 14 years, his loyalty had been to a man, not just an idea. With that man gone, the question became what he owed the cause versus what he owed himself. He chose to try to survive. On May 1st evening, Mohnke organized his escape group, including Hitler's secretaries Traudl Junge and Gerda Christian, plus other bunker personnel. The plan was moving north through subway tunnels and underground passages beneath Berlin, emerging beyond Soviet lines and making for Western zones where they might surrender to Americans or British rather than Soviets. The group descended into Berlin's U-Bahn system, moving through darkness lit only by flashlights and distant fire glow. They waded through water-flooding tunnel sections, passing corpses of soldiers and civilians who had tried the same escape and failed. Behind them, the bunker where Hitler had died would soon be searched by Soviet forces looking for evidence of his fate. But subway routes were blocked, collapsed tunnels, Soviet checkpoints. Mohnke's group was forced to surface near the Schultheiss-Patzenhofer brewery on Berlin's northern edge. Streets above ground were more dangerous than tunnels below. Soviet troops controlled every major intersection, while German stragglers wandered in confusion. On May 2nd morning, as Berlin officially surrendered, Mohnke tried one final push to break through Soviet lines. His group faced concentrated machine gun and rifle fire. In the chaos, the escape party fragmented. Some members took their own lives rather than face capture. Others surrendered individually. Mohnke himself, separated from the secretaries he had tried to protect, was captured by Soviet troops that afternoon. As Soviet soldiers surrounded him, Monke surrendered without resistance. The man who had defended Hitler to the last was now a prisoner facing an unknown fate. In Berlin, the Third Reich survived its Führer by less than 2 days. What no one predicted was that Monke would live another 56 years. After capture on May 2, 1945, Monke disappeared into the Soviet prison system. For several years, Monke was held in solitary confinement in Moscow, including a period in the Lubyanka prison, before being transferred to other Soviet detention facilities, where NKVD interrogators questioned him extensively about Hitler's final days, bunker operations, and various Nazi leaders' fates who had vanished in Berlin's chaos. Monke cooperated, providing detailed accounts of the bunker's final days. Monke was one of several witnesses questioned by Soviet authorities, and his statements were used alongside other accounts to better understand events in the bunker's final days and the failed escape attempts. But regarding his own wartime actions, Monke maintained he had followed orders and never committed war crimes. He insisted he was a soldier who had done his duty. Despite holding him for a decade, despite having access to witness testimony about alleged Wormhout and other massacres, the Soviet Union never charged Monke with war crimes. Whether this was because they found insufficient evidence, or because his value as a witness about Hitler's death outweighed trial complications, remains unclear. In 1955, as West Germany-Soviet relations improved, Chancellor Konrad Adenauer negotiated the release of thousands of German prisoners still held in Soviet camps. Monke was among them. Returning to Germany, he found a country transformed by economic miracle and eager to forget war years. Monke settled in Busbüttel near Hamburg and started a small business selling trucks and trailers. The former SS brigade Führer, who had commanded thousands, became a modest businessman, living in a comfortable house with his family, rarely discussing his past. Unlike some former Nazis who wrote memoirs attempting to justify their actions or gave interviews protesting innocence, Monke simply withdrew from public life. When he later spoke with historians, Monke focused mainly on Hitler's final days in the bunker, while avoiding detailed discussion of his broader wartime actions, carefully avoiding questions about his own wartime service. When pressed, he would say something like, "I served my country as a soldier, and now I serve my family as a businessman. The past is the past." West Germany in the 1950s and 1960s was a place where many former Nazis successfully reintegrated. Economic miracle prioritized growth over confronting uncomfortable questions. The Cold War made West Germany a valuable ally, whose stability mattered more than prosecuting every former official. Forgive and forget became an unspoken policy. But in the 1980s, as a new generation questioned their parents' Nazi-era roles, allegations against Monke resurfaced. British authorities who had never forgotten Wormhout pressed for prosecution. Survivors, now elderly, came forward with their stories, being forced into that barn, grenades exploding, dying men's screams. They wanted justice. In 1988, a German prosecutor reopened the Wormhout investigation. Investigators reviewed evidence, survivor testimony from 1940, documentation of Monke's command position, evidence of similar area incidents. But time's passage had eroded what they needed for successful prosecution. 43 years had passed. Witnesses had died, documents were lost, memories had faded. The direct chain of command remained murky. Who had given the actual order? Could they prove beyond reasonable doubt that Monke himself had ordered executions or had known about them and failed to intervene? Monke maintained his public position. "I issued no orders not to take English prisoners or to execute prisoners," he stated. "The accusations against me are based on misunderstandings of combat chaos." Without documentary evidence of direct orders, without witnesses who could definitively place Monke at the scene ordering killings, prosecutors faced an insurmountable burden of proof. In Britain, Member of Parliament Jeff Rooker campaigned throughout the 1980s for Moncke's prosecution. He gathered survivor testimonies, pressed British and German governments, and tried to build public support for the trial. But legal obstacles proved insurmountable. Criminal conviction requirements in German courts meant moral certainty was not enough. Prosecutors needed proof convincing a judge beyond reasonable doubt. That proof did not exist in a form meeting legal standards. The failure to prosecute Moncke illustrated post-war justice systems' limitations. Even when moral responsibility seemed clear, legal proof was another matter. Without documentary evidence, without witnesses who could testify under oath about what they personally saw Moncke do or say, without a clear chain of command definitively placing responsibility on his shoulders, prosecutors could not meet the burden of proof justice required. Moncke lived quietly in Basbüttel until his death on August 6, 2001, at age 90. He never expressed remorse for his Hitler service, never acknowledged responsibility for alleged massacres, never seemed to question the cause for which he had fought. To the end, his position remained what it had always been. I was a soldier. I followed orders. I did my duty. That is all any man can do. When Moncke died, German newspapers struggled with how to describe him. Was he Hitler's last defender? A loyal soldier? A war criminal who escaped justice? All three at once? The ambiguity in those obituaries reflected the unresolved questions his life left behind. He had survived Hitler by 56 years, and in that span Germany had been divided, reunified, and transformed into a prosperous democracy, while Moncke remained frozen in the identity he had forged in his 20s as one of Hitler's chosen few. Wilhelm Moncke defended Hitler's collapsing center of power until the end, because his entire adult identity had been built around loyalty to the Führer. From his early 20s, when he joined the SS, until the final days of the war, his sense of self-worth and purpose was tied to his role inside Hitler's system. His sense of self-worth, purpose, and belonging came from his position within the military and security circle that surrounded Hitler in the final phase of the regime. To abandon that position, even when the cause was clearly lost, would have meant abandoning the only identity he had ever valued. That psychological cost proved too high to pay, so he clung to loyalty even as everything collapsed. His story reveals how totalitarian movements capture ordinary people. They offer belonging to the alienated, purpose to the unemployed, status to those who lack it. Once someone has invested their identity in such a movement, admitting the cause was evil requires admitting their own life was wasted in service to something monstrous. Few can bear that realization. Moncke escaped prosecution because justice systems require proof, not just moral certainty. In Moncke's case, witness testimony could not be combined with documentary proof or clear evidence of intent, which made criminal conviction legally impossible. Cold War context made West Germany reluctant to pursue aging SS officers when the new enemy was the Soviet Union. As years passed, evidence disappeared, witnesses died, political will to prosecute faded. His case was not unique. Thousands of former Nazi officials and suspected perpetrators lived quiet post-war lives without ever facing trial, protected by time's passage, legal proofs demands, and a society eager to move forward rather than confront its past. But Moncke matters not because he was exceptional, but because he was typical. He represents thousands of ordinary Germans who found identity and purpose in National Socialism, who committed or enabled atrocities in its service, who then disappeared into post-war society without facing accountability. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how normal people become instruments of genocide and how societies reckon or fail to reckon with that complicity. Did he order the executions at Wormhout and Fontenay-le-Pesnel, or merely fail to prevent them? Does command responsibility matter if direct orders cannot be proven? How do we judge a man who showed unwavering loyalty to one of history's greatest criminals, yet never faced trial? These questions died with Mohnke in 2001, but the moral dilemmas they represent remain urgently relevant. In the end, Wilhelm Mohnke's journey from a cabinet-maker's son to a late-war SS brigade Führer and finally to a quiet post-war businessman reminds us that evil does not always announce itself with obvious signs. Sometimes it comes in the form of an ordinary man seeking belonging, purpose, and recognition. That ordinariness makes it more dangerous, not less, because it means that under the right circumstances with the right pressures, any society can produce men like Mohnke. And that possibility is what makes his story worth remembering. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. We hope you found this exploration of Wilhelm Mohnke's complex story both informative and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out our other content about World War II, Nazi Germany, and the difficult questions history leaves us. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's most compelling and troubling stories. Your support helps us continue bringing these important tales to light. See you in the next one.